You know, they say the best things in life are free, and I don't believe that that is true, considering the Duskmourn story was free. And I want a refund for having read it. Hey everybody, it's me, Lore Seeker, the saltiest robot on the planet. Thank you for joining me for another mindless ramble rant as I discuss the Duskmourn story. And I'm going to be honest, I don't even know where to begin with this absolute atrocity of fiction, because, let me be honest, this is one of the worst stories I've read all year. And I need to be very clear, I was going into Duskmourn with very low expectations. I didn't think this was going to be a good story. Hell, I didn't think this was going to be a decent story. And even with those low expectations, Wizards of the Coast has managed to let me down once again with not only some of the worst storytelling and worst plots we've seen in modern Magic, but also some of the worst writing, with some extremely cringy dialogue and just questionable choices of characters to include. Anywho, I suppose the best place to start is at the beginning, so I'm going to give a quick recap of the story. The very broad strokes summary is Nashi, Tamiyo's adopted rat son, had somehow ended up in the House of Duskmourn after the scroll containing Tamiyo's not ghost was somehow taken by the house. The Wandering Emperor of Kamigawa puts together a little rescue team that is assisted somehow by Niv Mizzet to go into Duskmourn, retrieve the rat, and get the hell out of Dodge. And almost as soon as they get into the house, everything goes wrong because it's a very, very scary place full of danger. Ooh. And in the end, Vagina Goth, the evil demon at the center of the house, kind of wins, but all the heroes escape. None of them die. Everything's hunky-dory. And it ends with just an absolute wet fart of an ending. This was quite a terrible story for me. I'm actually still processing most of what I read, and I haven't fully been able to parse what all of it is supposed to be. There's a lot of plot details that completely escape me, like Jace shows up for a split second in the story, explaining that somehow loot was taken by the house. Loot and Vraska were taken, and that's not explained at all. A lot of how some things occurred in this story are just flat out not explained. So loot is somehow taken by the Duskmourn house. Nashi's scroll is somehow taken by the Duskmourn house, and the rules inside the Duskmourn house are somehow ignored when it comes to Nico. We're told explicitly that you can't fight the ghosts unless you have special equipment, and Nico fights the ghosts without the special equipment because he's just a specialist of snowflakes, you know? It's bad. You know, two of my favorite modern Magic characters are in this story, Tyvar and the Wanderer, and in a fair and just world, that would mean that this story would be somewhat enjoyable because they are somewhat decent characters. However, Wizards of the Coast decided to balance them out by including three of the shittiest characters in this story: Zimone, Nico, and Aminato, who is just a living plot device. Oh, and I guess Proft is here as well, the Sherlock Holmes XP who is actually aggravating to read. He's very annoying just to look at his name on the page. I'm not even going to pretend that this is an organized review of the story, because the story itself is hardly organized or comprehensible. There are parts of it where I legitimately think the author has no idea what they're trying to do, and they just kind of write whatever seems appropriate for the moment. It's actually quite silly. We're not explicitly told, for example, why Aminato can't go into the house. We're just told that her magic and the house's magic reject one another. Also, speaking of Aminato, Aminato is in this story to help the heroes retrieve Nashi somehow. And she does this by giving them little fate shifter tokens that will help them undo their deaths once, or give them a vision of their potential deaths. It's not really well explained in the story what specifically they do, but basically these little tokens let you evade death once. And that's nice and all, but Nico, the bestest character ever, decides to be a hostile little shit towards Aminato, who's only committed the crime of wanting to help. Like, the second Nico has any characterization in the story, he comes across as an absolute rat bastard, and I think that's appropriate for him, but still, it's like, dude, could you make the audience like you any less? There's some legitimately weird choices of dialogue to use. Like, the characters in the story are dead set on not using the phrase black magic or dark magic. Instead, they use phrases like academically unsound magic, as if the author herself or himself, I didn't actually check, is terrified of just using black magic in negative connotations, like the entire story has to be warped around their political worldview. There's also, I just remembered, a part of the story where Zimone and Tyvar are fighting, and I kid you not, Tyvar shouts, "Behold the power of math," as he punches some cultists in the face. And I read that line with my virgin eyes, and I want a refund for the time wasted reading that line. But about the plot, this is essentially a Nashi story, surprising as that is to hear. You see, Nashi is the central focus of the plot. It is his scroll being taken, which kickstarts the plot and gets all of his friends killed, and it is him deciding to get over the loss of Tamio in the end that shows his character development. Look, I'm going to be very honest, it was kind of forced at the end of, oh, you have to get over your loss, you have to get over the death of Tamio and the death of your friends and let the scroll go in the Blind Eternities. And they were in the Blind Eternities because of Prof, and I'm not going to get into that because that actually annoyed me a lot. But still, the plot was based around Nashi, and I don't think this story did a good job of making Nashi seem any more likable to me as a reader, or as somebody with an interest in magic's lore, because all it really did is make me think, damn, this rat really got 4 of his friends killed for a scroll that he somehow lost, and he was acting like an antagonistic bastard to the people who were trying to save him. It was really not a good story for him. It's supposed to be his, like, you know, again, it's supposed to be the story where we're supposed to be showing him maturing as an individual, but really, it just made me like him a lot less as a character. Speaking of said scroll, its importance to the plot was Vagina Moth wanted it, and Vagina Moth is the demon who sits at the center of the house, controls the entire house, which is the entire plane, and he wanted the scroll so that he could gain knowledge of the multiverse, and use it to invade other worlds, or drag people from other worlds into the house and feast on their fears forever, or some similar such nonsense. And that's fine and dandy and all. He uses the scroll, more like siphons knowledge from it, in order to gain that planar knowledge, which is fine, whatever. But when the heroes show up and retrieve the scroll, and then later destroy it in the Blind Eternities, it's not really treated as a loss for him, because it turns out the entire time he actually had loot captive. And if that's the case, then why did you even bother with the scroll? Loot is a map of the entire multiverse, if I recall correctly. That's basically all the knowledge you could ever need in regards to your plans. So why even bother with the scroll in the first place if you have loot? It's the kind of question you have to ask, because having the scroll invited all of these problems into your house plane. The Wanderer, Tyvar, Nico, just going around causing a bit of a mess. It's really annoying that is how the story ended, with the revelation that loot was in Vagina Moth's possession. Like, dude, why did you even bother with the scroll then? Come on. Another annoying tidbit about this story is at the end, in the finale, Proft saves the day by generating an artificial omen path by using a combination of his knowledge of the house and some other magical nonsense to get the heroes out of there safely by creating, again, an artificial omen path door. And the story is explicit that he can only do it once and all that jazz, but, like, I don't believe that, and I don't think any other readers believe that. Like, if you can do that kind of magic once, you can do it again. We've been shown multiple times that spells are relatively easy to replicate in the world of Magic the Gathering, so I know that there's special circumstances, but those can be replicated with time, and now we just have a guy who can create artificial omen paths. Isn't that wonderful? Like, I know Wizards of the Coast was trying to shy away from Planeswalkers for the purposes of Commander, but what's the point if you're just going to start introducing alternative ways of planeswalking all over the place, basically as soon as we take the step back? Like, you're defeating the purpose, you're taking one step forward and two steps back with this. The entire point of having unique separate planes in the multiverse is that we, the viewers, get to experience them and their uniqueness across, the view of different characters. Giving us Planeswalkers was a good way to follow the story of one specific character across multiple worlds and give us little views into those worlds at the same time. There's two kinds of good stories in Magic the Gathering. There's the one I just mentioned, where one character travels across the planes and we get to see the world through their eyes. And then there's the stories of, like, Lorwyn, where we get to view the entire world through the eyes of a native and possibly see how events throughout the multiverse are affecting that world in particular. And I think both of those stories are really good and can be done well. What we have here in Modern Magic is this disjointed mess of characters who can go to any world freely, and we just kind of jump between the characters. So not only are we jumping across the worlds willy-nilly, but we're jumping between, like, viewpoint characters willy-nilly, and it's really not great for long-term storytelling, and I have no idea what Wizards' long-term plan is with this, because I'm not a big fan of any of these characters. Proft, Zimone, etc. Like, who am I supposed to be rooting for in this story? The Emperor? Kaito? No, I just can't feel anything for any of them. It's kind of bad. Am I supposed to feel for Winter or any of the other natives to Duskmourn? Well, no, I've known them for less than 5 chapters of dialogue. It's actually insane how little attachment I feel towards any of these characters, especially when some of them have been around for a while. I just don't know what Wizards of the Coast is going for here. When you're an author, one of your jobs is to get your readers to sympathize, or at the very least feel something for the characters you're writing about. And in that regard, I feel like the author for Duskmourn has failed completely to get me to feel anything but indifference or contempt for every single one of the characters in this story. Jace was okay, but he was only in it for a few paragraphs at most. Kaito, the Wanderer, were fine, but dull, and I didn't fear anything for them because of the whole fate-shifting thing, so I knew that they'd be fine, and the rest of them, I just flat out did not enjoy. None of them resonated with me as a person, and I don't think any of them would resonate that well with any average reader of these stories. They were just not enjoyable to read about, and this was not a journey I think anyone would grow closer to a character over. Duskmourn's story was quite unenjoyable. At the end of the day, we're also left with some questions, like the story still doesn't answer what's just stopping a strong enough wizard or planeswalker from just destroying most of the house with some extremely powerful magic. We're shown that it's very easy to bust through walls and go to different rooms. Yeah, the house rearranges and repairs itself, but it does so relatively slowly, and again, as I said in a previous video, I don't think that there's anything that could stop Chandra, for instance, from just burning the entire place down. Another question is, what's going to be going on with Jace from now on? His entire plot after Thunder Junction was to screw off with loot and to live a happy family. But we were also given some hints prior and after that Jace was going to be a big problem in the future. Is loot being taken by the house how he starts his villain story? I don't know, and I genuinely don't care to find out in the future, because what are we going to next? We're going to the Wacky Races world next, so that's probably not going to wrap up this story or tell us what happened afterwards. And I don't think any of the planes released or teased for next year are going to tie into this either. So it's going to be at least a year before we find out, possibly, what happens with Lute, Jace, and Vraska. So in that time, I'm probably going to forget all about what happened here in Duskmourn, because this was not an enjoyable story, and I don't think I'm even going to care about the resolution if we get one in the near future. And that's happened a lot recently with Magic stories. And I know that I often harp on and on about how bad the Magic story is in the modern era, and how every story is worse than the last. But the thing is, it really is starting to get to me just how bad these stories have been. And it's not like I go into these with the lowest expectations and then get surprised when they're bad. It's just that my expectations keep going lower and the stories keep getting worse. Like, imagine how good Duskmourn could have been. This could have been an amazing, fright-filled adventure. Think for a second. If Duskmourn was instead a genuine plane of horror, instead of a haunted house with some slasher monsters running through it. Like, imagine if this was the plane that Ashiok came from, where the world itself was perhaps a world of fear that perpetrated fear. Maybe people who visit it are automatically assaulted by their worst nightmares made manifest by the nature of the plane itself. Like, imagine, the plane is dying. The world soul of the plane is dying. Perhaps it's just gotten so old that it's starting to fall apart. And so it's hurt, it's dying, it's in pain, it's afraid, and it wants the visitors to feel that fear and pain, and so it assaults them with their worst nightmares. Imagine how cool that would be, where instead of a rescue mission to get this obnoxious rat out of the house, the purpose of the story was to find out what's wrong here. Why is this place crumbling? Why is it a entire hellhole of nightmares? And, we could have cool interactions between characters like Ashiok and like Nissa. Nissa could be here to explore the pained world soul, for instance, and Ashiok could be here trying to baptize the visitors in the religion of fear. It could be a really, really cool story, and that's just the kind of thing you come up with off the top of your head. But instead, we get this really lazy rescue mission, which has no stakes. None of the main characters we care about die. We're shown their deaths, but it's through like these visions of potential futures. But there's no actual stakes. Everyone gets out alive, hunky-dory. And we're shown that there's no serious consequences for the plot. There's some hints that there will be consequences down the road, like Proft is whispered to by Volgagoth at the end of the story, but I don't know if anything is actually going to come of that, and I don't know if Vagina Moth getting loot is going to have anything come of it either. It's aggravating to know that this could have been better with just a bit more creativity and just a bit more care to write a good story, but Wizards of the Coast clearly doesn't care, and that really does depress me at the end of the day. And I don't have much more to say on it. I'm a bit disappointed at this being yet another uninteresting, very bad story. But I really would like if more of these stories were better. Bloomburrows. You know what? I'm going to be positive about Bloomburrow. Bloomburrow's story was relatively enjoyable. It wasn't great, it wasn't amazing, but it was short, sweet, and nice. So that's how I'll end this story. Duskmourn's story was trash. Bloomburrow's story was, at the very least, enjoyable. So there you go. That's my positive comment for the day. Thank you guys so much for hanging around for my entire rant. I will talk to you in the next video.